So in this video, we're not going to talk about anything medical related. We're actually going to focus more on just the basics of camping and backpacking. We're going to talk about a few essential ideas and principles. And while this information can be useful for any time you're outdoors, there is going to be a bias towards the Appalachian Trail and East Coast backpacking. So the first thing we'll talk about is leave no trace, and that is an entire idea about how to preserve the environment in which we are enjoying, the nature that we are using for our own purposes. It has 7 principles that are listed here. We're going to go into a few of these principles more closely, a little bit more in depth, because they are very important to the type of backpacking and hiking that we're going to be doing on the course. But if you have more interest and want to learn more about this, you can actually go to Leave No Trace. You can go to their website where there's lots more information. There's even courses that you can take. That website is lnt.org. I encourage you to just check it out. The first principle that we're going to talk about in more detail is travel and camp on durable surfaces. So the first thing is when you're hiking, stay on the trail. That's pretty obvious, pretty self-explanatory, but sometimes you'll have a tendency to bushwhack to go check out something that appears very cool or something that you want to take a closer look at. Before bushwhacking to do so, I would encourage you to look around. There might already be a trail that you can take to get to that specific site. Some trails are obvious. They might have gravel on them. There might be logs along the sides to sort of keep you from veering off. So pay attention to what you're walking on and try and preserve the surrounding vegetation. While you're hiking, do so in single file. For the Appalachian Trail, you're not really allowed to hike or camp in groups of greater than 10, which is why during the course we will be splitting up for large portions of it. When you camp, you need to do so 200 feet from not only the trail, but any water source. Sometimes that can be very hard to do, and sometimes you'll actually be torn between going a full 200 feet or using a pre-used site. Now, pre-used sites are places that have been used over and over and over again by backpackers going through the Appalachian Trail. And so they're pretty obvious. There's no vegetation on the ground. There might be a small fire ring. You really do want to use those sites first instead of going off 200 feet and creating a new site, especially in highly trafficked areas. So you do need to find a balance between that 200-foot rule, but then also using these pre-used sites. And finally, when you are creating your kitchen, it's ideal to use bare ground or even a rock, because when you have that stove, it is going to create a lot of heat, and it will damage any vegetation that's below that. And so using a rock or bare ground will help prevent that. And this is a great example of a picture of a pre-used site. There's literally no vegetation on the ground. It's well worn. You can see down to the dirt. And this is an ideal place to camp for the night because you're not going to be harming it anymore. It's already pretty much destroyed. But then by camping here, you're preventing further destruction of surrounding areas. The next principle is going to be disposing of waste properly. Sometimes people get a little embarrassed talking about this stuff, but it's the reality of it. We're all going to be urinating and defecating on the trail. So the rules of that are you need to urinate 100 feet from your camp or 200 feet from water. It's ideal if you can to urinate on rocks, gravel, pine needles, because those will generally dry quicker. Although most of the time animals aren't going to be drawn to urine, sometimes they will detect the salt that is in our urine and will dig up the area looking to lick that salt. If you need to defecate or stool, you should do that 200 feet from the camp and obviously any water source. And you need to do what's called a cat hole. Now we're going to have small, they almost look like garden shovels, they're called trowels. You're going to dig a cat hole. It needs to be 6 to 8 inches deep and about 4 to 6 inches wide. And that is what you are going to deposit your stool into. When you're done, you then need to cover it with the soil that you removed. A little tip is it's better to actually dig your cat hole preemptively, meaning once you get into camp, find your quiet spot 200 feet from the camp, make that your own, remember where that is, and dig yourself a cat hole, because it's a pretty horrible thing to be woken up at 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom and having to rush out of your tent when it can be quite cold and digging a hole. So I would recommend doing it before you actually need it. We also need to pack out all of our products. That includes wet wipes, toilet paper. If you come to an area that has permanent facilities, we're going to be at one place called Crater Lake that actually has toilets and trash cans. There's a shelter that we're going to be camping near that actually has a compost toilet. With that compost toilet, it's important to know that you will throw mulch into the bin after you use it, but you still need to hike out your toilet paper. Okay, it's not meant for any paper products in the compost toilet, it's just human waste. Moving on down the line of things to dispose of waste properly, you're going to pack out all large food waste and trash. When you wash dishes, you want to do it at least 200 feet from camp or water again. And ideally, when you have your dishwater, it needs to be biodegradable soap. Use as little soap as possible, and then you actually want to strain your dishwater to catch up as much food products as possible. Now, you might do that into a bandana that you designate as just the food bandana, and it's going to be just collecting all the leftover scraps of food, and it'll go into the bear bag, and that'll be its only use for the entire trip. Sometimes we will have small funnels with a filter in it that we will use to strain food from the dishwater. Realistically, though, you should be trying to scrape your dishes completely clean with your tongue, with your spork, with your spoon, whatever you are using to eat with. You want to get all that food up. That's just not only good calories, but also limits the amount of cleanup that you need to do. Before you actually leave the campsite in the morning, you need to do a trash sweep where everyone lines up horizontally across the distance of the camp, and you make a couple sweeps, passes back and forth. Any trash you find, even if it's not yours, you want to pick up. The idea is to always leave the camp better than how you found it. The same goes for as you're hiking along. If you see a large piece of trash, you want to pick that up, and I encourage everyone to have a small bag maybe in their pockets or on the outside of their backpack that they can use to actually collect trash. So an example in the left upper corner is the trash cans we might see in our area are actually bare trash cans, so you actually have to slide your hand in there to release the lever and lift up. And one thing you definitely don't want to do is what's down here in the bottom right corner is if one of these trash cans is full, don't put more stuff in it. Or if you can't put your trash in one of these bins and close the lid completely, you're just going to need to keep carrying your trash until you find a better spot to dispose of it. Because this does nothing for the environment and only attracts more animals. The next principle is going to be minimize campfire impacts. There are absolutely no open fires along the Appalachian Trail in the portion that we are hiking along. If you do make a fire, you want to use a pre-established fire ring, and those are usually going to look like this picture where there's a couple rocks built up around the area where there might be some coals. If you do build a fire, again, you only want to use downed wood, so you're not going to be cutting down any trees to do this, downed wood, and you want to keep the fire as small as possible. Again, we talked about using rocks or bare earth for your stove to prevent any damage to the vegetation below it. And the other principle we'll talk about is just be considerate of other people, other visitors, other animals. When you're hiking, you're going to want to talk to your classmates or your friends, but do so in a quiet voice if you can. Some people like to play music on the trail. If you do have headphones on, I don't recommend that because then you can't hear dangerous situations. A couple years ago, we were hiking, and thankfully we heard a rattlesnake flipping its tail that alerted us that there was danger right on the trail. But just at that same time, there was a thru hiker coming in the opposite direction with his headphones in, and he did not hear that rattlesnake and its tail. And so we had to sit at the opposite side of the rattlesnake, just jumping up and down, waving our hands to try to get this hiker's attention. Otherwise, he would have likely gotten bit by that rattlesnake. So I don't recommend any music at all. Maybe if you're at a campsite and you know that there's no one else around, you could play some soft music. But we want to just be considerate of the environment and other visitors. If possible, camp 200 feet from other groups. Farther is always going to be better if possible to minimize impact. Once again, if there's a lot of pre-used sites available, you should try and use those. Ask if it's okay if you camp next to another group, and just let them know it'd be better if we all, minimized our impact. There are going to be shelter areas around the Appalachian Trail, and those are meant for high impact, high use. So we're going to actually be staying at one of those, and you're going to see it looks quite built up, quite developed. If you happen to be hiking and there is a pack animal or a horse coming down, you want to wait on the downhill side for that animal to pass. They spook easily, so you're going to want to be quiet, not make any sudden movements. If you have a mountain biker coming on the trail, there shouldn't be any mountain bikes on the Appalachian Trail, but on other trails, it might be multi-use. A mountain bike should yield to you, but what I'll tell you from experience is they rarely do. They think that they have the right of way quite frequently because they're going faster and you should just get out of the way. But they're realistically the ones that are to be more cognizant of us and slow down and yield to us. For us specifically, since we're going to be in a larger group, we should be yielding to oncoming and passing hikers. If you see a hiker coming up behind you, let everybody in front of you know just to pull off to the side so that they can go ahead and slide right past us. So a great example of waiting for the pack mules to go past. Now notice he's actually on the uphill side, but that's because the trail that they are on is well delineated. These horses aren't going to be going off the trail very easily. So for the Appalachian Trail, when we hike, once again I said we're going to have a group of 10 or less. When you cross a road, you're going to do it one at a time. You want to be responsible for yourself. You're going to look both ways, like our parents hopefully taught us. If you are hiking along a road, you do want to hike in the opposite direction of the cars so that you can see the cars coming and very much get out of the way. Final thing about hiking the Appalachian Trail is that it's very well marked in most places, but you need to follow what's called the blazes, and sometimes they can be a little tricky to decode. And if you don't have blazes, I often say let the trail guide you. You might see cairns, which are basically stacks of rocks built up on top of each other. You might have logs that are blocking forks in the trail that should indicate to you that you need to follow the trail and not cross over that log. This is an example of what some of the blazes will look like, and this is an example. And if you decipher this, what it's telling you is that there's essentially a fork in the trail. The Appalachian Trail is going to be going left here. If you go right, you're going to start a new trail that will then be marked by the blue blazes. And this is an example of cairns. They're often used in areas where there's not trees to actually paint a blaze. So you might just be following a multitude of cairns from one place to the next. For camp hygiene and safety, we've already talked about filtering water. Anything you would do regarding bathrooms and basic hygiene in the real world, you should be doing here. That means washing your hands, biodegradable soap, using hand sanitizer. You do want to cook 200 feet from camp to avoid food smells being near where you're sleeping. Ultimately, also, the bear bags will be 200 feet from camp. So you can put the cooking and the bear bags in the same area. If you leave camp for any reason, try to use the buddy system. If you're not going to use the buddy system, at least let somebody know where you're going. Like if you're going to go off into the woods to use the cat hole, or if you're just going to try to catch a quick glimpse of a sunset. And the biggest thing I have to say here is there is an area that we're going to be swimming at. Do not swim alone. And these are what some of the food storage areas will look like this. This is not for trash. This is where instead of having a bear bag, you actually put your food in this bin, and it saves you the trouble. There will be one of these at the Brinks Road shelter. And the final thing we'll talk about is pooping in the woods. I recommend everybody have what I call a wag bag, and that's basically a plastic bag or some bag that already has everything you need in it. Toilet paper, your wet wipes, your hand sanitizer. It's going to have an additional Ziploc bag where you're going to put used toilet paper into the bag because you have to hike out all of your toilet paper. And there are a number of methods that you can use to actually poop in the woods. This is a diagram of some of them. They're quite funny, but also you want to find one that's comfortable. And when we get out there, we can talk more about this. But I hope this lecture gave you a quick idea about the do's and don'ts of camping outside and how we can not only be safe physically, but also hygienically.